Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Receive e-invoicing capability webinar today. We'll just wait for a couple of minutes for people to join. Numbers are coming up now, but we'll still just wait a couple more minutes. It's been half an hour. So, oh, yeah. Okay, everyone. Well, we're at 11:05 now, so and just as I said that, some more people are joining. Let's get started. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to this webinar for which we'll talk about implementing of e-invoice receive capability. Now for a bit of housekeeping before we get going. We will send out a copy of this presentation after the webinar. It'll contain links of relevance which Alison Smith, our adoption advisor, will be pasting into the chat throughout the webinar. And the webinar is being recorded. It will be saved on our website, and we'll share a link with you in about 2 weeks. The core presentation is around 25 minutes, and the remainder of the time will be to work through your questions. If your questions do remain unanswered at the end of the webinar, please redirect them to us at e-invoicing@nb.gov.nz you'll see those email addresses coming through anyway in the chat and on the slides themselves. So of particular note, when you do get to asking questions, please would you use the Q&A function rather than the chat function. This just helps us triage your questions more effectively and hopefully get all of the questions answered while we're here. There'll be an online poll early in the webinar. Alison will drop a link in the chat for you closer to the time. And lastly, the majority of you who joined us today are from local government organisations. This webinar will be more targeted towards you, but the content's still very relevant for those of you from wider government. I also see some of you have joined us today from the private sector, and we're really pleased to have you here, and we hope you find value in this webinar also, in particular ideas to improve your receive capability. So let's get started with the karakia. If I could pass over to Linda for this, please.
Ia te mana, kia mau, kia maia, ka huri taku aro, kei te pai kahurangi, kei reira te oranga moko, ma mahi tahi ka ora, ka pūwai, a mātou mahi katoa, ka puna, ka tika, tihe Māori ora.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Linda. Right, so let's talk about our agenda today. In November, we ran a webinar that covered e-invoicing receive capability at a higher level. Today's session is a follow-on from this, and it will involve us diving a bit deeper into the technical side of implementation. Along with this, we'll cover the resources we have available and some pro tips that we've picked up along the way. I should say that the content we're covering assumes the audience is already some of the way through their e-invoicing journey, so it won't be completely foreign. To give some background in our role in PEPOL in New Zealand, the New Zealand People Authority sits within MB. Our team is small, but we cover many aspects such as PEPOL standards, stakeholder engagement, and the technical and non-technical side of how to implement. We work closely with the Australian People Authority too, which is the Australian Tax Office, and we share the Australian-New Zealand PEPOL standard with them amongst many other functions, such as the mutual accreditation scheme we have going for access point providers, that you will learn a bit more about soon. So if we could go to the next slide, please. I'm going to start with mentioning this resource first, which is our ANZ PEPOL.
Sorry to interrupt, Lise. Are we going to do the poll now?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sorry. Alison is just going to share a poll on the screen. We just want to clarify whereabouts you are at the
I've put a link to the poll in the chat, and I'm just about to share the poll itself on screen, which will have a QR code for you to link to as well.
Perfect, thank you. So yeah, does your organisation use any of these types of automation already? Interesting, very interesting.
That's flattening out. Would you like me to move to the next slide, Lise?
Sure, thank you. Yes, please. So what stage are you at your e-invoicing journey so far? This is great. This means I'm got a whole lot of information for you all.
Back to the presentation.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now. We will actually include screen grabs of the results of those in the email when it goes out later today.
Right. Could we please go to the slide previous? Thank you. All right, got away with myself there a little bit, but I'm going to start with mentioning this resource first, which is our ANZ People e-Invoicing Business Guide. I'm aware that I'm going to cover a lot of information today, and I'd like to reassure you that we have it documented, also ready for you to refer back to when you need. So as I said, it's our e-invoicing business guide, and it's available on our website and via the link in the chat that Alison is going to add, and as well as the link on the actual presentation itself. We created this to document advice and lessons that we've learned from good 60 government e-invoicing implementations. We also had input from the agency e-invoicing champions that have already enabled, as well as a number of industry specialists. Most things you need to know are covered clearly in this document, and it's written to cover a wide range of readers. You can lean on other resources available from MB, your provider, and other agencies. There will be links to ours as we move through the webinar, and Alison, as I said, will add these links as we go through. So next slide, please. So what is people invoicing? People e-invoicing is the digital exchange of invoice information directly between buyers and suppliers' financial systems. This transfer is made possible by the sender and receiver each having e-invoice enabled software and an access point provider or two in the middle to transmit using the common PEPAL standard. So I'm going to touch on the NZBN now because it's a super important piece of the puzzle. The essential part from a supplier and a customer point of view is that each party's NZBN needs to be captured on both sides. To clarify, the supplier's customer master record should hold the customer's NZBN, and on the other side, the customer's supplier master record should also hold the supplier's NZBN so that they can basically talk to each other. The NZBN effectively acts as the way the different systems identify each other as a customer or a supplier. So it's kind of like, I know you might think about maybe an account number or an email address or something like that. That's that you between trading, of those the other parties' reference. But yeah, it's for e-invoicing, it must be the NZBN. In Australia and in other countries, mostly it's the ABN or the tax number, but New Zealand's slightly different in that we use the NZBN. That doesn't matter from a trading with other countries perspective. It's all built into the specification. So the data flows in a four-corner model like this. So the C1, so the C corner one is what I'm trying to say there, is the supplier's billing system, or FMIS, so Financial Management Information Software. It includes the NZBN and the e-invoice data being sent, but they also need to include the NZBN of the customer they're sending to. In the world of emailing a PDF, the way of delivering that invoice to the customer was with an email address. With an invoicing, there's no email at all. It's all about the NZBN, so it's essential to include it. When this invoice is sent from the supplier's billing system, it passes to the corner 2, which is the supplier's access point provider. So the access point provider picks it up and checks that the invoice contains all of the mandatory information per the PEPAL specification, 2 of these being the customer and supplier NZBNs. It then looks up the customer's NZBN on the PEPAL network. So it goes away and checks out to make sure that this is a valid NZBN, and then also looks to see, one, whether they can receive e-invoices, and because to receive e-invoices you must register on the PEPAL network, and then 2, find out who the access point provider is, so the corner 3 that looks after the customer that is ultimately going to receive that invoice. Then assuming all of these conditions are met, the sender's access point provider passes it on to the customer's access point provider. So then the customer's access point provider receives the e-invoice data, carries out any further checks required, such as rechecking that the e-invoice aligns with the PEPOL standard. It's just something that all of the access point providers do as part of their service, and want to make sure that it aligns with the standard, and then along with any other services that they've agreed to do for their customer, so such as data transformation, maybe checking for particular fields that they might want to remap on the way through, that kind of thing. And then the e-invoice data is sent off to the customer's FMIS. So then when the customer's FMIS receives that invoice, generally it'll pass into a processing queue in the FMIS. And the first match that's actually done is on that NZBN. So that's when it becomes really important. If the customer holds that NZBN in their supplier records, which I hope they do, then the invoice automatically is assigned to that supplier account. So as I said before, it's really key in identifying the suppliers involved and the customers involved. Other checks are done after this in an FMIS, and it varies greatly across systems, but generally a system will validate the references supplied. If there's enough information on the e-invoice data that's been sent, maybe it has a purchase order attached to that invoice that where it's already been receipted, so it's seen to be approved. So then the invoice can depending on the software, can be three-way matched and then pulled through as an invoice ready to be paid. But like I said, though, it does vary across systems. And just to add a little more to this, the access point providers are generally able to send and receive success and failure messages on the way through that four-corner cycle. We'll cover a little bit more about this a wee bit later. Okay, could we have the next slide, please? So there are three distinct steps to a successful implementation. The software that you're receiving the e-invoice through, the connection to the PEPOL network, and then there's the business processes and supplier onboarding piece. We'll cover each of these in more detail on the next slides. Next slide, please. So there are two parts to the software piece: the software that will actually receive your e-invoices. So that might be your AP automation system, or it might be your FMIS, your Xero, your Check One, any of those, and plenty of others. And so there'll be that software, and then there's also the part of seeing whether your software has an inbuilt access point. So I'm just going to pause here on the software bit and just say that it's worth noting the NZ government procurement rules that require the government agencies to send and receive based on their invoice volumes annually, have recently been upsized to include councils and wider government. And we know that we have a number of representatives from councils here today. The business guide contains detailed information about how you might implement e-invoicing, but the key is the NZGP, or the New Zealand Government Procurement Rules, refer to your primary system. So whichever that system is that you receive the majority of your supplier invoices through right now. And when we think about software receive capability, e-invoicing works best in your natural business software. And by natural software, we mean your finance systems, your ERPs, your OCRs, AP automation, that kind of thing. E-invoicing is really just another channel that sits along all those other existing channels. Okay, if we could move to the next slide, please. The next piece of the puzzle is how your system connects to the PEPOL e-invoicing network. When we look at how we connect to the PEPOL network, there are two parts: the software that receives those invoices, as well as whether that software has an inbuilt access point, as I mentioned earlier. It's ideal if your software is already e-invoice capable, and many are. The main e-invoice capable ERPs we know of being used by governments right now, and being receiving invoices successfully are TechOne, Oracle Fusion, Microsoft Business Central, and SAP. There are certainly others. Some smaller agencies are actually using Xero2. If you're in doubt about whether your software is capable, we have published a list. You can ask your provider, but also we've published a list on of our invoicing capable software products on our website via the link on the screen, and Alison will add that to the chat. If your software isn't capable, then there are still options available to you. So your OCR provider may have a plug and play option for you. That's quite common, or an access point provider may also be able to help you. So then the next part is how your software will actually connect to the Peppol network. This is usually done via an access point provider, as explained in a bit earlier. The ERP such as SAP have an access point built in, but in most cases the organisation will need to engage an access point provider separately. If you need the services of an access point provider and you're a government agency, there's a government syndicated panel in place with 7 providers to choose from. NB has done the procurement on your behalf for this, so there is no need to run a full procurement process. And all of our panel providers have done many successful implementations. If you haven't already, go to the New Zealand Government Procurement website for detail about the open agreement and the process for requesting the buyer's guide. Part of this will be starting off by after you've initially requested, you need to sign an NDA. Alison will post the link on the screen in the chat. We also have a page on our e-invoicing website that lists all our access point providers that have current accreditation with the New Zealand and Australian People Authority. So that's also a really good place to start and narrow down your search. All right, can we go to the next slide, please? So the third aspect is about reviewing your current processes and considering those that will need to change to accommodate e-invoicing, and this can be quite time intensive. We've seen that the most successful implementations are where the processes are adapted to wrap around e-invoicing rather than the other way around. So there will be some tweaks or changes to your processes. For example, if you use purchase orders and there's opportunity to automate how the e-invoices come in and match to the POs and associated receipts, then you'll need to look at how your existing business processes may need to adjust, and maybe to your workflows in your system for e-invoicing. And then there's the change management part. So some of us might say this is the hardest part. We strongly recommend stressing to your users that e-invoicing is just another channel. Change is hard, and there may be a few changes to everyday tasks, but over time everyone will see the benefits. The transition from PDF to e-invoices will take some time. It's not going to happen overnight. It does take time. Everybody says that has done it already. The speed of this is up to you and will depend on the rate at which you're able to transition your suppliers to this e-invoicing channel. One thing we see a lot is the challenge of staff becoming used to receiving e-invoices instead of PDFs. So this can be at the finance user level where they now see e-invoice data by default, or it can be for approvers that are used to having the invoices or copies of them sent to them directly from the supplier before they pass them on to the finance team. Every accounts payable person's nightmare. Things get lost. People go away on holiday, can't approve their invoices, that kind of thing. This is something that takes time to address, but it can be managed with the appropriate training and preparation of some good user guides, and honestly does get easier. So, and then we come to the supplier customer communication and onboarding area. So it's important to keep focus on transitioning your suppliers to e-invoicing. You'll see the benefits if you do. That said, as I've probably already indicated, it can be a long game. We suggest starting with your low-hanging fruit first, those that will receive benefits to the organisation first. Perhaps you'll have some suppliers already sending invoices to other agencies. Focus on those ones and the ones that have simple requirements. If you need any help with identifying suppliers that are already sending e-invoices to government, we maintain a list of suppliers to government that is updated every quarter. This may be a good place to start, and you can download that list from our website, and Alison was putting the link in the chat. We also have a wider range of resources available on our website to assist, including a couple of amazing guides created by Linda here, the e-invoicing change management guide and the supplier communications toolkit, really worth downloading and reading. And also, if you're looking for more tips in this area, then we just happen to be running a webinar next week dedicated to supplier onboarding on Wednesday, and we encourage you to register if you haven't already. Okay, next slide, please. So now I'm going to get a little bit more technical and talk about a couple of technical pieces that underpin PEPOL e-invoicing. The first one is the PIN ANZ PEPOL billing specification. So in summary, really, if you're sending or receiving an e-invoice across the PEPOL network, you must use this specification, this particular one. And with respect to what's actually in that specification, from a user perspective, if you think about the fields that you would populate if you were creating an invoice from scratch, as in a data entry view, the supplier and customer details, the invoice number, date, due date, GST number, all that sort of stuff, as well as the line items and prices being charged. All of these fields are also transmitted via PEPOL in the same way every time, and they map to the sending and receiving parties FMIS software. And the specification itself does contain around 200 elements or fields, but there's a lot you could make use of if you wanted to, but actually about 25 to 30 of them are mandatory, including those that I've listed out, kind of the general areas that I've listed out there. So supplier details, their legal name, their address, GST number, customer details, same again, name, GST number, address, invoice numbers and dates, due dates, item details, tax information, currencies, and then the references, which I'm sure when you start working on your implementations for e-invoicing, you'll learn all about references because they're super important. And of course, I don't know why I've put that last there, but the NZBN is should be at the top. They're obviously really key. And then so this specification, it's mandatory for all PEPOL accredited access point providers when they're sending and receiving invoices in New Zealand and Australia. And as I suggested earlier, New Zealand and Australian PEPOL authorities work together very closely, so we share that spec. And one of the other things about this particular specification, the ANZ PIN specification, is that it allows trade between countries. And so that's at the moment, more so New Zealand and Australia. We were the first to adopt it, but the rest of the world's catching up with us quite quickly. Okay, next slide, please. You're sick of hearing my voice by now, I'm sure. So this slide covers off the other technical piece that I wanted to talk about, which is the industry practice statement for invoice content. So this was developed by the New Zealand and Australian PEPOL Authority, so MB and Australian Tax Office, along with the digital service providers of Australia and New Zealand. So they are also PEPOL specialists and industry specialists. So it's not mandatory for everyone to use it, but it's strongly recommended. The New Zealand syndicated panel providers, so the 7 access point providers we have on our government panel do have to comply with it. As a condition of their agreement. So it's actually whilst it's a bit less technical, it's a nice user-friendly way of looking at technical information. It's really good for adding sort of real life considerations for your organisation when you're looking to implement e-invoice capability. It recognises basically that if organisations just work with the specification on its own and send only the mandatory data elements in there from the specification, then it doesn't always give the medium to large businesses and government buyers enough information to be able to get those invoices through efficiently. And it's aiming to give guidance to access point and software providers also, so that everyone is thinking about actually how does this e-invoicing thing work in practice, where the people are involved. And so essentially there are a number of fields that have been discussed and we've had feedback on over years about that we believe should be strongly considered to include when you are in your e-invoice data when you're transferring it through. And as well as that, we've rated them under 3 different ratings. So we've got the required for interoperability, so they're the really frequently required elements, fields, and are vital to automate. There's the recommended, which is slightly down the chain. These help buyers achieve quicker, more straightforward processing, such as 3-way matching, so your purchase orders, that kind of thing. And the conditional ones, which might be included in the interest of supporting buyer processing and enriching the business information. So that might be the kinds of fields where they like a purchase order line reference, which adds more information or more richness to the data and allows particular receivers to do more with that invoice data when it comes in, but then at the same time they're not necessarily the common fields that every type of software can support, and so that's really important to remember. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? I promise I'm almost done. So let's talk about the learnings that we've had so far while we've been doing this. So the overall goal of invoicing is the faster processing and payment of invoices, regardless of what side you're on, whether you're the customer or the supplier. And so I'm just going to go through a few tips here. While the technical side of the implementation is going on, we strongly recommend that the first thing you do is start collecting NZBNs from your suppliers. It's something that can just be worked on in the background, and it's, as I've laboured several times already, the NZBN is the key field. So it's super important to collect this information and get it updated in your supplier master data. Get the right people on the project team and ensure you've got a project sponsor. It's always really good to have someone that owns it. And we believe there should be a good mix of users and technical experts to build the best solution. So yeah, buyer references and purchase order references, they're super important as well, and they can be a real issue. They're the references that are provided to give context on what the invoices are for. If you take time to identify these with your supplier, and map your data processes so that you know that you're going to capture these once you're testing your invoice solution. And for example, if you're transitioning, say, from OCR at the moment, so you scan all of your invoices through, it might be that one of those references sits in the body of the invoice somewhere rather than in the header, and so it might be that if you could easily be missed, so and it could be a key reference that it doesn't come through with the invoicing and you need it. So it's super important to give a lot of time and attention to things like references, and really just to the wider subject of data mapping overall. It's really common data mapping to cause you problems early on. It's painful, but it's really worthwhile going through a data mapping exercise. It's just a really good way to make sure your receiving of the invoice journey is going to be as seamless as possible. And as I touched on a wee bit earlier, due to the software used across different organisations, it's really good to know that some suppliers may not be able to support the fields you'd ideally like to receive. So whilst if they send you a PDF and they've got some additional information, notes and things on there, it might be that the e-invoice send solution that they have doesn't necessarily support those that extra bit of information in the same way. And so if I, or, sometimes systems just support one of the reference fields rather than two, that kind of thing. So, and there are also different ways that different software manages those references. So on the face of it, for example, Xero, if you are creating an invoice to a customer, then on the face of it, you only see just one reference field on the screen. But actually, they've got a special way of formatting that reference, so you can actually send multiple references from that one box, which is really, really good. Xero have some really good guidance on this on their website. And whilst I know our audience here is here because of receiving e-invoices, it's so useful when you're receiving e-invoices and you have suppliers that are using Xero, maybe they're new to sending e-invoices too. So it's really helpful to have that bit of that tip in your back pocket. And we've included a link to that that particular page about sending e-invoices. It's quite a good resource in the chat. So credit note handling. So this is a bit of a trick. So we have an invoice specification that I was talking about earlier, and then in Peppol there's an invoice document type, and then there's a credit note document type, and they have actually written two separate specifications to handle those two types. However, some software just doesn't support the credit note document type. If a Xero sender, for example, was to create an invoice, send it to their customer received it and said, oh no, that's not right. The Xero sender couldn't, say reference that invoice, say right click, for example, and go generate credit, and then be able to send that through as an e-credit note. But if the user was to create a credit note from scratch, so a new transaction, but put in the negative values, then that would work, and you could send that through as an e-invoice. And so it's just really, it's good to know that that some software doesn't look after the credit notes, but the invoice specification anyway manages the scenario there. So I would say it's probably much cleaner for most just to focus on the invoice option, whether that's a positive value or a negative value. Your access point provider will know a lot more about that as well, so feel free to go to them or come to us. So I've talked about documenting processes. It's really handy to do basically a current state, future state sort of exercise, and how to see where your gaps are and how your processes will need to adapt to e-invoicing. A couple of the things that are that pop up quite a bit are the exception side of things. So if you, at the moment, say if you're receiving an invoice as a PDF, maybe by email, and the invoice doesn't contain all the information that you need to process it. So you might email back to the supplier, or you might call them and say, hey, this invoice isn't complete, and I need to know this extra information to be able to process it. When you're moving to e-invoicing, then you kind of want to keep that a similar supplier experience. you don't want to just, if there's the opportunity to automate getting those e-invoices through, you don't want to be in a position really where e-invoices are taking longer to process, or because there's less information, that kind of thing. You don't want to reject them because there's not enough information. You really want to keep talking to people and re-educate them and get the right information through in the long term. And kind of attached to that is putting onerous requirements on your suppliers. So we've seen that a bit with some government agencies where agencies require additional fields or information that they're not day-to-day fields that you normally would use, such as that purchase order line reference. There is a place for that, but actually a lot of businesses can't support that. It just leads to an unfavorable experience all around, and it inhibits suppliers getting on board. We kind of notice that if a supplier will have a few goes often at sending an invoice, and then if it's not working, people kind of tend to go, okay, I'm not going to bother then, I'm just going to go back to the old way. So it's really good to keep communicating, be consistent with your messaging. Actually, e-invoicing is supposed to be easy, and I promise you will get there. If you put the work in now, you'll see the benefit. And so then when you get to the stage of testing, ensure you select your test partners so that you have a good cross-section of the scenarios and the suppliers that you do work with, just to avoid any surprises after you go live. What else can we talk about? And yeah, that's another option that you might look at maybe in your second phase is to if you're using EDI at all to receive some of your invoices, this could be a really good candidate to transition to e-invoicing as well. And I'm just going to reinforce also, please get familiar with the industry practice statement for invoice content. It's a super good resource that means something to everyone who is involved in this journey. Okay, next slide, please. So we've got some other scenarios that which I just wanted to call out basically, and they are around consolidated invoices and utilities invoices. So consolidated invoices as they stand don't necessarily fit well into the e-invoicing processes. So we are working on that. We're very aware, and we are in the throes of establishing a working group to get through that topic and work out how we do that, and as well as the technical side of getting a consolidated e-invoice into a system. You've also got to think about some of these consolidated invoices will arrive in your system on one day, and because of your processes, you might pay them the next. But if you did that with an e-invoice, it might take a week or two, because the invoices would have to be, the one invoice might have to be split out to 10 or 12, and then it just takes longer. So trust me, we're working on it. And the other area is the utilities, which is telecommunications and electricity. So your One New Zealand's, your Sparks, your Meridians, Mercury Energy, that kind of thing. They historically include data that's additional to what you'd normally have on your run-of-the-mill invoice. Could be that it's a massive invoice that might have way too many pages to even look at. I've certainly seen phone-related invoices that are 3,000 pages of PDF long. You don't want all that coming in your e-invoicing channel, probably. And we actually see in the end, most receivers don't see the value in ingesting all of that. There's sort of probably the minimum amount of data that they'll enter into their finance system, but they'll have the detail accessed in another way, whether that's by a PDF attachment against the account, or an Excel, or even a portal that they access to look at their bills. And there's also that kind of older format on those types of invoices where they have opening balance, there's adjustments to opening balance, new opening balance, plus current, blah, blah. And so those don't really translate that well into the e-invoicing model right now. So there's quite a lot to think about, and we have it all on our work program to address this year. It's going to involve a lot of surveying of government agency requirements, and as I said, working groups are probably the best way to go here. And so this will help us build and document what these models will look like going forward with suppliers to government, large suppliers to government, sorry, having to provide e-invoices to government agencies in January next year. It's just becoming more of a more front of mind, and it hasn't really in the past been so much of an area that that has had to be looked at. And so my last thing, I promise, is I just want to quickly talk about the Procure to Pay community of practice, or the P2P COP is how we refer to it. And I'm mentioning this because we might have some new people on this webinar that aren't aware. So this is a quarterly knowledge sharing networking meeting for our government agencies. And so we mostly talk about invoicing, the successes and the not so successes, payment time information, that kind of stuff. It's a really good way to network with people, share notes, collectively solve problems. And we also see different agencies that may use the same software. They might be in different stages of their journey. You might have the ones that have already done it, all live and working, and someone else who's also using that system, but they're not really sure where to start, or not sure how to nut out a certain problem. Excuse me. We see people getting together and helping each other, and it's really good initiative. So our next one is on the 31st of March, and please just email us at einvoicing@mb.gov.nz if you'd like to join us. And then from then on, you'll be added to the invite list and be invited every quarter. Okay, last slide. Questions. So now's the time to answer your questions. Please use the chat function and ask away. We've run out of time and I've talked for far too long. You can email our team with your questions, and we'll have a note of them anyway, if you put them in the Q&A. And thank you. Hello.
Hello, Andrew Cook here, one of Lisa's colleagues. Firstly, well done, Lisa. It was a long and very detailed presentation. It's hard work. Hey, I've been answering some of the questions in the background, and there's a question which I think both myself and Linda Moore are best placed to answer now from Beth Hull. I'll pass some questions to you shortly, Lisa, but I think you deserve a break. So Beth is asking, to date, what is the uptake of suppliers invoicing by e-invoicing? I've heard that there has been quite a low uptake. I also note that we will be required to have our large suppliers invoice us by e-invoicing. How are we expected to adhere to this requirement? So there's two parts to this question. How are we currently tracking? So last month, there were just under 10,000 New Zealand businesses that sent or received an e-invoice. That represents about 2% of all businesses, or about 5% of our addressable market of the 250,000 businesses in New Zealand that have cloud accounting software. It is growing, and there are a lot more suppliers due to become enabled in the coming months. This is the early adoption phase. Now, a prominent software company is due to roll out another bulk registration, and we're expecting that will result in up to, all up, we're expecting about 100,000 New Zealand businesses to be enabled for e-invoicing. Currently, it's about 50,000. So that's about 40% of the addressable market. So a lot of our activities are moving towards just getting organisations to use e-invoicing. Now, the second part of the question. I also know that we'll be required to have our large suppliers invoice us by e-invoicing. How are we expected to adhere to this requirement? So this is the sort of thing as a government agency that we'll be looking for your procurement and contracts people to incorporate this in procurement processes. So it's the sort of thing that should be considered. Suppliers who are e-invoicing enabled, generally speaking, will get extra points in procurement processes against those suppliers that do not. Obviously, this is something which will be enacted as contracts expire and new contract processes are commenced. So, in other words, existing contracts are not expected to be reviewed. Meanwhile, the New Zealand Government Procurement team are working to update their various contract or AOG templates. Linda, is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, that was pretty comprehensive, Andrew.
Thank you. So I've been working through some of the questions, and Lise, this is where I'm thinking of putting you on the spot with some of the questions.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just trying to work out the best one first. So
I can see Davina's one here, which is a bit earlier.
Yes, and I did respond to that, and I suggested that you might have a little bit to add. So how about I read out the question, and then you can take it from there. So Davina Wong says, we act as a third-party financial intermediary on behalf of multiple government departments. Invoices are addressed to the government department, but we pay them on behalf of the government department. What NZBN do we use if we want to ensure that invoices come to us, but still addressable to government departments? So I've responded that that this is that you need to use your organisation's NZBN for invoices to land into your finance system, but you need to ensure that your supplier provides sufficient reference information to identify who the government customer the invoice is for. Lise, anything further to add to that?
Yeah, so I'm happy to talk with you, Davina, about this offline. It's quite a niche little situation, but we do have other government agencies doing something similar at the moment. Treasury, for example, look after a number of different ones. Anyway, there's not just one sender NZBN and one receiver NZBN. There are actually two of each when you get down into the technical nuts and bolts. And so that's how we would manage it. Like I said, we can talk about it separately, but essentially the receivers in NZBN, one would be probably yours, and the other one would be the NZBN for the agency that you're looking after.
Thanks, Lise. Our next question is from Alyssa Lamb from the Electricity Authority. She's essentially asking about supplier onboarding. So they're already live for e-invoicing and they want to get their numbers up. Alyssa, we could give you a very long answer to this. I highly recommend you attend Linda's supplier onboarding webinar next week. We're going to be going through everything there, loads of tips and tricks. So we'll park that one if you don't mind. Lise, can you answer the next question from Mary Bedwell? Do you have test e-invoices available?
So what do you mean by that, Mary? Do you want to see samples of what they look like and what the data looks like? We do have sample messages, and certainly if you want to talk to me directly, I can contact you and we can have a chat about it, and I can clarify a bit more about what you want to see. But we definitely do have a number of resources for you to look at.
Okay, so
actually sorry.
There you go, Liz.
I was going to say that actually on the same page on our website where our business guide is located, there's a link underneath that that's a technical self-service, and so that's just a little interactive, basic, I must say, spreadsheet. So essentially, one side of the screen is what your classic invoice might look like, very, very basic. But then, if you click on all of those key fields on the invoice, on the right-hand side, it will is the actual invoice message or the XML that was created from that invoice. And when you click on the key field on the left-hand side on the invoice, it will take you to the actual field that's being updated on the right-hand side. So that might be quite useful for you to have a look at as well, so you can get some comfort as to what actually is going on there. But totally happy to discuss one-on-one.
I just need to acknowledge it's 5 to 12. I think we'll keep going for another 5 minutes or so, if that's right, Lise. We've got about 4 questions left. So I don't know if you've got it on screen, but there's a question from Lana Lane. I'll read it out. So hi, are you aware if the incoming invoices can come into the ERP through the access point, but then go through or link to OCR as well? So not necessarily having to manage incoming invoices using one or the other channel. So the existing rules the existing rules already built in the OCR for recognising POs and vendor accounts can read e-invoices too. But to take in there.
Short answer is yes. I think you'd be best to talk to your access point provider, but as to how they technically get that to work. But I think maybe we're talking here about an OCR provider's service of a plug and play kind of thing, that the invoice comes in via OCR to a point, and then an e-invoice document is created in your FMIS to match that. I think that's what we're talking about here.
Thanks, Luce. I'm going to answer the next question from David Bullenhoven. Hi, we use the contracts module in Technology One for progress payments. How does this work with e-invoicing? I can't answer that specifically, but I know that a number of government agencies who use the Tech One contracts module have configured it. David, if you want to configure it, get in touch with us and we will connect you with the people who have done it and they can give you the answer. So just send us an email at einvoicing@mb.gov.nz and we'll connect you we'll provide some details for you.
Absolutely.
Okay, next question. George Smith. If a supplier sends through an e-invoice that requires updating, does the supplier need to send through a new updated invoice, or are they able to amend it while it's drafted in your system? Over to you, Lise.
Okay, so my first answer would be it does depend on their software. So if you're a 0-cent supplier, then you can only send an invoice as an e-invoice once. So Xero knows once you've first sent it as an e-invoice, and then that option is grayed out to be able to resend it. So whilst the sender might be able to go in and edit the invoice, they won't be able to resend as an e-invoice. It'll have to be sent as a PDF by email, I suppose.
I'll just jump in here, please. Yeah. I guess it's maybe the simplest way is that if you need an updated invoice, you would ask them to send a completely new e-invoice with a different invoice number so that it's not duplicated, which would probably mean that you would have to send through a credit as well, just to offset the original invoice that didn't have all the information. Is that an option?
Yeah, that's right. That's one of those tricky little side processes that are really important to nut out in your planning stage. The other sorts of things that trip you up. Yeah. But absolutely happy to talk more about that with some real data, I suppose, or a real example.
Okay, we've got two more questions. I'm just going to do Stephen's first because it's a quick one. Stephen joined late and he's asking how to go about setting up an access point receiver or provider. Is there one already set up we can use, or do we need to arrange this? So some information was shared previously in the chat. So I'm not too sure if you're a government department, Stephen, but there is a government panel of access point providers, but our website has details of all 40 accredited access point providers. And if you need any further information, again, you can contact us directly. And then I think the last question before we wrap up is from Christina Martin. Now, it's a bit of a handful, but Lisa, I don't know if you've read it yet, but essentially she's asking if we could make purchase order numbers a mandatory field for e-invoices. She's asking that because it would significantly reduce the time spent by the team going back and forth to get invoices reissued between other government departments. Have you had a read of that yet, Lisa?
Some of it. Yeah, and yeah, these references, and particularly purchase order references, can be really tricky. Probably my short response to that would be we do have other agencies that are live with receiving e-invoices that are PO shops, so no PO, no pay. And they do, I think, reject at their gateway based on a couple of checks. So essentially, if there's no purchase order number coming through in that field, their access point provider might reject it, but then they also will send a message back to the the supplier to say, hey, your invoice has been rejected for this reason. And so these are we don't love the option of rejecting at the gateway. I think really the only time that we view rejecting at the gateway as an acceptable way to go is when it's already supported by your communications with your suppliers, or your terms of trade, as it is, like, you know, when you engage that supplier, they know straight off from the beginning that it's a no PO, no pay situation. The other option we see agencies doing is not rejecting and letting everything through, but then someone goes through the queue that's got all the invoices that don't have POs attached to them, and it's a case of re-educating the supplier one by one to actually please only send us an invoice if it's got a purchase order number on it.
Can I also add in here,
Yep.
Lise, Christine was suggesting making purchase orders as a mandatory field. It's probably important to point out there are a number of businesses and government agencies that don't require a purchase order. They might want a cost centre number, and so they don't actually use purchase orders, or they might have a mixture of some items are purchase orders and some items are not. So so it wouldn't work in that situation.
Yeah, and so just to touch a little bit more on the references, as per the PEPL specification, one or both of it's mandatory to either send a buyer reference or a purchase order reference. So you don't have to send both. You can send both, but you can't send none. So from that perspective, one of those references has to come through anyway. But from a perspective of making it mandatory, that's probably an agency by agency situation, because it's just there are a lot of invoices that go through that don't have purchase orders on them for other agencies, so we can't just make one blanket rule for everybody. That said, Andrew and I particularly have been doing a lot of work around standardization and what that might look like. It's a very big topic, and we've recently, the team have upsized our invoice reference requirements spreadsheet to, I think, about 110, is it? 120, something like that. And that lists every single government agency's reference requirements, whether it's a buyer reference or a PO reference or both. And if you look at that sheet, everybody does things a little bit differently, and so trying to find a clear path in the middle of all that is it's quite something.
We've come to the end of the questions now.
Oh, I totally must have talked too much. Maybe everyone's gone to sleep after having to listen to me for a while.
Well, there's still 81 people online, so you can't be doing half bad. But I'm getting hungry, so I think we should call it.
Okay. Yeah, and like I said earlier, if there's any questions that you have, please just email us, and I will come back to you as soon as possible. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We will look forward to seeing you at the next webinar being held. Have a great day. Bye.